All right. Welcome to Simple Healthy Life, where our goal is to have real, insightful conversations on topics that we find interesting. And today, this topic is actually very interesting because MJ texts me and he's like, "Hey, I want to talk about the cave allegory." And I had just happened to be reading about this and just kind of like studying it a little bit, just becoming a little bit more familiar because it's an interesting narrative by Plato, and that seems to happen a lot to us. We seem to have like be on the same wavelength for a lot of just like topics that we're finding interesting.
Yeah.
So the cave allegory is an interesting, story, I guess, and it is by Plato, and it's used to demonstrate a couple things. But first, I guess I'll just give a review, and then we can kind of discuss it. So and I'll give just a very brief. You can go read it online. You can go search the cave allegory, and you'll see, there'll be free PDFs and stuff where you can read this. But basically, what it is, it's this imagery of prisoners being kind of like locked away at a cave, kind of like underground. There's no light, coming in, and they're chained up, and their whole lives they've been facing a wall. And so they're chained up facing a wall, and behind them is some sort of flame, some sort of light source. And in between the flame and the prisoners, there are like people moving objects, and I'm not entirely sure who these people are, but they're kind of like moving objects. They're moving around them, but they can't see it, and all they see then is the wall with a shadow projection on the wall, and they think, because this is all they know, that whatever they're seeing in front of them is the truth. It's that is their life. Every shadow is reality. It just comes up from there. They're hearing noises and sounds behind them, but they can't look and see because they're all chained up. And so they think everything that happens in front of them is a reality. It's almost like they're watching a movie, So I guess Plato didn't have movies, but this is exactly what it is. They're watching a movie, and that's all they know. And one day, one of the prisoners is freed. And so, he gets past the fire light source kind of thing. He gets outside, and immediately recognizes that, wow, it's super bright out here. And he has, kind of some difficulty with his eyes kind of adjusting, and it's very like kind of challenging, but eventually adjusts. And he's outside in the quote unquote real world, and he recognizes the true source of light, which is the sun. And he kind of like, ponders that, reflects on everything, and nonetheless, this freed prisoner then he adjusts to life outside, and he starts thinking, well, I should go back and free some of these other people because they don't know what they're living miserable lives. They're blinded. They don't know what real life is, and so so he goes back down into the cave. And this part I find just very interesting. He goes back down into the cave, and because he's so adapted now to the light, that he actually finds it very challenging to navigate through the caves because there is such little light. And and so because he's down there and he's trying to free these prisoners, but he's having such a hard time trying to navigate, all the prisoners think that he's going insane. That, oh my God, this guy went out into left the cave, and now he can't even navigate in reality. He can't even see what we're seeing. He's ruined. He's changed forever. And so they actually think he's like manic and ruined. And so then like, I don't exactly remember if they chain him up back then, but they basically were said, well, we're not going out there because that changes people, and that changes them for the worse, because look at these shadows. I mean, that's what's real. And so was that a good synopsis of the story?
Yeah, that was great. Yeah, I think you hit home on all the pieces, and what I want the audience to realize is that each one of those pieces is an analogy.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And one of the things the Greeks were so great at is like personification and analogies.
Yeah.
And what Plato was essentially saying is that we view our reality, we have a limited view of reality.
Mm-hmm.
Now, and the extreme example is the people in the cave. The cave is kind of the symbol for like blocking out the rest of the world, right? The fire is producing that light behind you is a symbol for like kind of the fake reality that we live in. But what's super interesting to me, and I think we all have examples of this, and I'll give kind of an example here in a second, is when that person finds this additional knowledge, right? We'll call it additional knowledge, and then comes back to tell the others, right? They're not willing to bend. They're not willing to believe that maybe there's more to this reality than they believed, right? And I mean, how many examples do we have in our own life to say like, no, this is the way it is. This is just the way it is, right? One kind of funny example I'll give you is like, I call it the Santa Claus effect, right? So like you're 9 years old, you're 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, right? And Santa is real. He just is. Your parents have told you this, and there's been presents under the tree, and there's the picture of the dude, and you could pick him out of a lineup, and you open a book, and Santa is real. Until one day, Santa's not real. You find out Santa's not real. You can't unfind out, right? You'd be lying to yourself. And two, anybody that still believes Santa's real is an idiot or a kid, right? So we have countless examples of that in our society that, you know, we have to find out that there is more truth out there. And so I'll give you why, and we'll get into it a little bit more, but I'll give you the why I started thinking about this. And
yeah, please.
I have been doing, first and foremost, I was turned on to the telepathy tapes. And if you guys have not listened to the telepathy tapes and you're willing to listen with an open mind, I recommend you listen to the telepathy tapes. Essentially, this woman has put together a podcast that is covering nonverbal autistic speakers. They call them spellers because, and I hope I didn't offend that. I hope I didn't just totally butcher that for anybody listening. But essentially, there are people out there that have autism, severe autism, and they're nonverbal. Right? They're nonverbal isn't necessarily that they're mute, but they don't form words the way that we form them, so they can't communicate with us. And up until recently, we have, as a society, treated that as treated them as if they're stupid, right? They're not smart enough to talk, so we've treated them that way, and we haven't really tried to communicate with them on a level like me and you are communicating.
Right.
Luckily, as we've adapted and grown over time, we've realized that that's just not the case. And they can communicate with us now, thanks to technology, through spelling. Can actually type out on the iPad, or a lot of them struggle with motor skills. So a lot of times it's not writing with a pen, but pressing I can't see and understand, right? And really getting really far along. And what they're finding is that many of these people can actually mind-to-mind communicate with their parents. And the parents were the people that were bringing this to the attention of the school teachers and the attention of the what's the word for someone that would help you, the facilitator. And the parents are saying things like, "Hey, I might sound crazy, but I'm pretty sure that he or she can read my mind." And this is happening all over the world. And I think it's always probably been happening all over the world, but now we're starting to understand that build a community of people that it's happening to. So what they did, and specifically one case, was they said, we don't believe you. It's just not true. There's no such thing as telepathy, and it can't happen. So what we'll do is we'll test you. So they've been doing tests where they'll put the the son or daughter in one room, and they'll put the mom or dad in another room, and they will show them random numbers from a random number generator, and the son or daughter will tell you exactly what the number is.
Like what the parent is seeing.
What the parent is seeing,
in the
100%.
other room. Yeah. Wow.
62974.
Yeah.
They were started doing. They stopped doing 3-digit numbers because they felt it was too easy, and that I guess that's a thing, right? But essentially, what they're proving now is that there are people out there that have the ability to connect mind to mind. So I started going down that path. I started listening to them, and I couldn't stop because it was just incredibly interesting to me. And I started thinking about, what if we are all trapped in the cave right now? Now, we're trapped in the cave, but we have all of our 5 senses. We have our ears, we have our eyes, we have our nose, we have our sense of touch. And we believe that that's all there is. And that's it. And if somebody comes to you and says, hey, there might be this thing over here that you can't see, you can't do, how many of us are willing to just go, nope, there's no sun out there.
All right. Yeah.
So that's what sparked the allegory of the cave for me.
Yeah, it is super interesting. Actually, you mentioned the telepathy tapes a couple of weeks back to me, and then I think just recently, and I listened to the first one, and I will say the podcast is actually very well produced, and it's great. It's very interesting, and so yeah, I'm kind of diving into it, and it is interesting. It is interesting to see, to postulate that there is more out there, and you and I were talking earlier too about even like our typical senses. There is more beyond what humans can sense. Even like if you look at like our visible light spectrum versus like the complete light spectrum, it's like we have just a sliver of of visual capacity to pick up, whereas the whole full spectrum is so large. And then we were also talking about like there are, even within the animal kingdom, there are animals that demonstrate like amazing sensory capabilities. Bats are like bats infrared or something
Radar.
like that. Radar, yeah. And then there's owls with their like night vision kind of thing going on, and
Or dog whistle.
yeah. The dogs with their hearing, their hearing capabilities. The UPS truck turns onto my street, like the second it turns on, I see Teddy's ears pop up. And it's like, it's a decent drive down there. He knows exactly the second it turns onto the street, the fact that it is the UPS truck, not a school bus, not a big truck. He knows exactly what UPS truck sounds like from half a mile away, which is like so remarkable. But there even within the animal kingdom, there is more more to the sensation, more to experience as a whole than we give credit to, not to mention outside of the potential animal kingdom. What else is out there? And to your point, and maybe the point of the telepathy tapes, is that, hey, maybe they're picking up something that isn't necessarily normally picked up, and it's kind of hard to test, and isn't really within the bounds of what we would seem to be within the cave, but is still there nonetheless. And I think the cave allegory is actually really relevant in a number of cases. Call it the fact that there's more stuff out there than maybe we realize, or maybe we're kind of too confined to like just basic social norms or whatever it might be. Plato actually wrote that in response to his mentor Socrates being executed for encouraging people to think outside the box.
Really?
Yeah. That was his response, because they executed him, and he said it was kind of along the lines of, you're pushing the boundaries with how you're encouraging people to think, and so he wrote that in response, which I find very interesting.
That is really interesting. To take it to use the same analogy along the telepathy tapes. So what happened at some point is that these people kind of rose up, and they were like, hey, I think there's something going on here. So there's an organization called ASHA, and I'm going to ruin what it stands for, but essentially it's like when you have somebody in your life that's like this, that's nonverbal, what you're going to do is that word I was looking for was speech therapist, by the way.
Oh, okay,
You're going to go find a speech therapist, right? Someone that's speech and hearing. I think it's like Association for Speech and Hearing. I don't think the association will be at the beginning and the end, but ASHA is essentially it, right? And ASHA says, hey, spelling's not allowed. Okay, you're not allowed to use that as a practice because there was any number of reasons. One, it required somebody to hold the hand of the speller, right? So they could be manipulating them, right? And there's some good to this. You don't want someone holding the hand of your son or daughter being like pressing the buttons for them, right? You want to understand their perspective, their words. But essentially it grew into this thing where you're just not allowed to use that.
For these experiments, or because I know that was one of the main criticisms of the telepathy tapes is that there were certain kids that they studied where the parent was facilitating communication. So I think it is a valid criticism, and it's something to think about. It's not something to turn one off completely, but if they're kind of guiding the kid to a certain type of communication, that's a point of contention, I suppose.
So, but here's the distinction. It was they were saying that you're not allowed to use that to communicate with your own offspring. Okay, so they're saying like parent comes and says this is Johnny, and Johnny's nonverbal, and I'd like to learn how to communicate with him, right? And then through whatever means, your own studying on the internet or whatever, you're like, oh, there's this thing called spelling where maybe we can teach Johnny how to do that. You go to your speech pathologist and they go, no, we don't use that. That's not what we do, right? Because the people that accredited me and accredited us that have decided that that's not what we do. But essentially, when you really boil it down, like, F them and everybody that tells you what not to do. It's my kid, and I want to learn how to communicate with him, so I'm going to try this, right? And you know deeply that you're not going to be the one putting your word into his mouth, right? You want to know what he's doing. So essentially, some people were able to push through that and say, okay, cool, maybe it doesn't work for you, maybe that's not what ASHA does, but this is what's happening now, right? So then you have this. Okay, it's happening now, and now we seem even more crazy because essentially what he's telling me is that he can communicate with me mind to mind, right? There's stories, all these different stories out there that they have given us, which is pretty awesome. But what I'm getting at is like there's something there, all right? There's something there, and I think when I bring this up to even the most skeptical of parents that don't have an autistic nonverbal child, they'll say something like, yeah, well, there is a connection there, even for us, as with my kid, right? I kind of know what he's thinking. I know, like, kind of know, right? And it's like, all right, so the door's open, right? So the cave light, there's a little bit of light over there, right? There's like this thing, unexplained light that we see out of the corner of our eye, but we're just not going to bother looking over there because it doesn't do us any good, right? It actually doesn't help us in our current scenario. We're actually locked to this wall. And so I believe that over the next, I think, less than 5 years, I believe that these stories, these examples on countless topics are going to get reconciled, are going to get put together, and probably with the help of AI, are going to be accrued, accumulated to the point where we can start to say there are X amount of non-biased things that we have done. And in fact, on this particular topic, what they've shown is the first 50 papers that were written on telepathy were all written as if no shot, stupid, stop writing about it. I wasted all the time that I was writing. We already did all the research. The last 100 papers, like scientific research papers, have all had some level of, might be something there.
Yeah.
So what an amazing thing.
Yeah.
What an amazing time to be alive.
Yeah. It's incredible. Yeah. Um, why people don't come around and have an open mind about certain things. I mean, I'm not entirely sure. There is this for context. I think there generally is this kind of feeling that like the quote unquote the man kind of keeps you down in some way, and I think that's especially when like healthcare and how healthcare works, like you mentioned, like the speech pathologists and everything. I, I I think it's partially true. I don't know if a lot of people, especially like healthcare professionals, completely reject things, but I do know there is like standard operating procedures, and someone says, well, hey, like I mean, the whole like ivermectin kind of like hydroxychloroquine, these kinds of things, people will come up and say, hey, I heard that this medication or this treatment works for X, Y, and Z. Um, the doctor, some of them will probably be like, yeah, no, that's silly because they've been just trained, in a certain way, and so and there's a little bit of ego there, right? Which I think is problematic. It's not just our own egos that we need to really check. It's everyone has that, and I think that plays a huge role in defining those kind of like social norms, whether you're a professional or not. And so, what happens though is that there is like standard operating kind of procedures. Person presents with X, issue. Here we need to try A, B, and C, right? And the problem is that the treatments A, B, and C, they've been shown to help in some way, probably, but things change. And to your point, maybe someone escapes the cave and says, well, actually, we never talked about D, E, and F, and people don't have this like kind of open mind and don't have the interests, like the maybe the political or financial interest to then pursue this. And everything really is dominated in a lot of these cases, especially as you mentioned, like the ASHA thing. It might be an insurance thing, and so insurance dominating the landscape, saying, well, we know A, B, and C has been shown to help for whatever in some capacity. So I don't really care about D, E, and F because this is all we cover. And those standard operating procedures don't seem to change very much. And I'll give you an example to make it real. You know, someone presents, hey, I have really bad anxiety. My mental health is terrible. Okay, well, here's maybe go see a therapist, which is quite frankly, I don't know why it's not recommended more. It should be recommended. Like, hey, go talk to someone so you can process what you're feeling. Like, one, that should be the first go to, but often isn't. Sometimes a doctor will say, hey, jump on this medication, which some of those medications have been shown to be somewhat helpful, and I'm not going to get too political here, and I'll just say that sometimes they're not, and maybe more often than not, but nonetheless. Those are your two things, and go do that. If it doesn't work, well, I guess you're just depressed the rest of your life. And I it's sad because I do work with a lot of people because mental health and obviously eating go kind of hand in hand. And luckily, I'm able to do that because I think that's great, right? But some people just sit there and I guess I'm just depressed my whole life. 55 years old, 60 years old, and they just have had depression their whole life, and they're just running through different medications, and none of them seem to be helpful. Nothing really seems to be helpful. And some of these individuals really do try. They really do. And, it's tough when you're in the pits of despair. To do anything is hard, but a lot of these individuals do try a lot of different things, and they really do follow the advice of those who are professionals, and yet, not getting much relief, which is sad. But nonetheless, so insurance covers A, B, and C, and then, in this specific case, you look at studies with psilocybin, right? And we had the psilocybin on the ballot for mental health, and it didn't pass, right? It didn't pass in Massachusetts, and that's such a sad thing, because if anyone who voted no didn't actually have an open mind, and had they actually looked at some of the studies, you would see how remarkable how powerful that can be, especially for mental health. They show that like people with significant depression, anxiety would take one dose of like a facilitated trip or whatever, if you want to call it a trip, but it's one dose of psilocybin, and 90% of them had significant improvements, had no depression at all, no depression, anxiety symptoms at all after one single dose. And so why is that? Why is that not part of the regimen?
So a couple things. The psilocybin thing is close to my heart, as you know. One, I think that whether it was on purpose or just poorly done, the marketing around that question was really poorly done. I mean, they gave the illusion that this was going to be marijuana 2.0 in Massachusetts, right? You were going to have mushroom shops everywhere, and people were going to be, on mushrooms, walking down the street, and you're going to smell mushrooms, right? Whatever, right? Like all the stuff that we were going to go from alcohol.
Kids are going to get mushrooms in their Halloween candy.
Yeah, right. That was the illusion. And let's face it, we know that some vast percentage of people don't read the questions, right? Okay, I know top 5, right? I still can't remember whether the MCAS was good or bad, and I didn't vote on it because I didn't do the research, right? But people would say, okay, social norm, mushrooms bad, X. Well, one of the cool things, and hopefully I can describe this to the people that are listening out there, as to the way that it works in the brain. So have you read Michael Pollan's How to Change Your Mind?
No, I think was there a documentary on that? I think I watched some documentary on that.
Very good.
I didn't read a book though.
Yeah, very good. He was an author that was interested in food for a long time. He wrote The Omnivore's Dilemma. Great writer. Anyways, for a long time he was out. He was very out on hallucinogenics, mushrooms. Then had the experience, went and learned about it. Went to Johns Hopkins University, did the research, all the things. Here's how it works. Your brain is always looking for the quickest way to get the answer. Right? That's what keeps us alive, and it keeps us functioning. And we talked on this podcast about the default mode network and task positive, right? Well, because of that, think about your brain as a ski mountain, and what are you looking to try to do? You're trying to get from the top to the bottom as fast as possible. So what happens is you end up with these pathways. They say neurons that fire together, wire together, right? So you do the same thing over and over and over and over again. You have the same thought pattern over and over and over and over again. That becomes who you are. That's your personality, right? Your personal reality. So we've kind of talked about all this stuff. Well, when you have this high dose psilocybin experience, what happens is that part of the brain slows down. Okay? So now less energy, less blood, less whatever, less from an fMRI imaging, right? Less color is going to that part of the brain. The part of the brain that is doing all of your higher level thinking starts to slow, right? When that happens, it's still trying to figure out how to get the fastest way down the mountain. So this is when you start to say, okay, I can hear colors, I can see music, right? Like these things that start happening that people are oh my God, you're tripping. No, you're, right? That's probably where it came from. Oh my God, you're tripping, right? So essentially what happens is when that starts to impact your brain, picture it like a snowfall on the ski mountain. Now you get the opportunity to rewire, change your thoughts, rewire your brain. So think about it from an addiction perspective. How many people do you know that smoke cigarettes? They have a meal, they smoke a cigarette. Have a meal, smoke a cigarette, right? That's an addiction. That's your brain wired now to go one, next, one, next, one, next. When you do these high dose trips, you get the opportunity to rewire your brain.
Right.
And this is not me speaking about it, although I would love to. This is straight from Michael Pollan's How to Rewire Your Brain, and straight from, or How to Change Your Mind is really catchy book, and straight from Johns Hopkins University, right there, doing the research on this stuff. So again, this social norm, being trapped in the cave, we come back and we go, hey, there's a way that you can get out of this cave. There's a way that you can live a better life. You can see a new reality. You can start fresh, whatever that is for you. And people go, nah, I don't think so. You can't even see in the cave anymore. You're so crazy. Right?
Well, that's kind of how it is, right? And I think like I'm not exactly super tied to social norms. I'll go out the box a little bit, and I don't necessarily think I'm crazy. I think that I just maybe my trait openness is a little bit higher than other people. But yeah, you're exactly right in terms of, I think you did it actually. I've never heard the skiing kind of analogy. I usually use the trail and the forest analogy. You can go to a trail, you can look at the trails, and you could see people walked along this trail for hundreds of years, tens of hundreds of years, or whatever it might be, and it's very well defined and amongst a nice overgrown forest. And for a lot of people, maybe their neural pathways, their trails don't bring them where they want to go. They want to go to C, but every time they take this trail, it's just so much easier to walk from A to B because it's well defined. It's just it's a lot of effort to try and like cut through the forest and go off trail and get to point C where it maybe leads them to a better spot. And this is especially prevalent in eating disorders too. You can bring up smoking, which is another good example. Eating disorders, smoking, whatever it is, even like the very typical like classic anorexia. People think, oh, this person just go eat something, right? And like as if it's that easy. It's like telling the smoker, don't smoke, right? Just don't do it. Like it's that easy. People aren't stupid. People are actually, in fact, people who are kind of in the more restricted, like a lot of people who struggle with anorexia are actually really, really intelligent. And so, to tell them to just go do it, it's really not that simple. And it's because we're dictated by those neural pathways. A lot of the time, the brain just doesn't have the capacity to rewire itself in a way that we would love to see. It's not as always, it's the whole like Nike slogan. It's not just about just doing it. I would argue that it's about doing it in a way that is manageable, right? And so that's something that we definitely can, we work on. It's like there's a little bit of just do it, but in an intelligent way, a way that they might have not heard of. But nonetheless, yeah, they know that the psilocybin can increase neuroplasticity by X number of percent. It's a wild percent. I'm not even going to give it out, but because I don't know it off the top of my head, but it's a lot. And so to your point, yeah, it's like snowfall. And now you have the ability to have rational thought. And so when you take these, when the people take these, whatever, the psilocybin, and then they have like a therapist there who says, okay, let's talk about, I'm just going to use food, for example, because it's just something more familiar. Let's talk about food for you. Why is it that you always restrict? And maybe they're in this state of like high ability to make new neural pathways. They'll say, well, I'm just so afraid of gaining weight. And the therapist will say, well, that like if you eat a balanced meal, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to gain weight. In fact, it means that you'll nourish yourself. And they'll say, well, yeah, that is true. And I know that. And I tell you, a lot of people who eat, minus the psilocybin, a lot of people do know that. Like I'll have these conversations and people will be so self-aware. They know all the things. It's not a knowledge deficit. That's why I always say eating disorder, smoking cessation. It's not a knowledge deficit. It's something that, something in the middle between action and knowledge. It's whatever it might be. That's the bridge that needs to be gapped. So, yeah, no, I do find it interesting where there are these things that are outside the typical norms or outside of our cave, and we just tend to shut down from that. What do you think that is? Like, why aren't people as open as they could be?
Well, I've been thinking about this a lot, and I know it's kind of a strange thing, but the more I think about the way we are as a society, in social norms specifically, I think we're so impressionable when we're young that when we're told this is the way it is, and it goes good for us, right? Like pretty decent life. Like this is the way it is. Okay, well, it wasn't so bad. Okay, it must be right,
Yeah.
right? And then especially when we see our parents or our authority figures say this is the way it is, and then even go one more generation, this is the way it is, right? Your belief is that this is the way it is. And
Right.
we've talked about this lots of times on the podcast. I think Lauren Folan did a great job of explaining it, but like challenging your belief system is, one, it takes work. Two, it takes time. Three, it takes courage. Four, it's not guaranteed to benefit you, right? You could be the guy outside the cave, and all of a sudden you come back and your whole world is blown up because no one will be your friend anymore. No one will talk to you anymore. What do you mean you can hear your son think? Like, okay, well, sorry, I'm no longer really kind of friends with Mark. He's, right? These challenging of our belief system is just something that is it's socially unacceptable for many people. I mean, look, Socrates was put to death for it, right? And I was thinking about it because of this, and I hope I'm not offending anybody, but like this Israeli-Palestinian conflict, right? It's not a me and you conflict. It's a generational conflict. So if my grandmother was like, hey, these people are bad, and my mom was like, these people are bad, I'm going to at least start off saying, hey, these people are bad. And what good does it do me to challenge that belief, right? And I believe that there's definitely good to be done here, and I hope that people can see both sides, and I hope that we're trending in the right direction, and I hope all that stuff. But essentially, it's more likely than not that we're not, right? It's just another example, right? Slavery. Slavery was, not everybody that lived during the slave times was bad, right? Not everybody that owned slaves was a terrible human.
Right.
It was a social norm, believe it or not. And Dan Carlin, right? He did a really amazing podcast on this, and I know I'm treading on thin ice here, but like essentially, like the economic system was in Europe, not even America, was based on the fact that you had other people to do the work that you didn't want to do or didn't have to do, so you could do other work, right? And just so we're clear, like I'm not in favor of slavery in any way, shape, or form, but I do understand that there were not bad people that had people working for them, and it was just a social norm. And how many generations did it take for equality?
Yeah, how do you learn something is bad? Well, I mean, you learn it from the stories that you're told, right? I mean, in terms of that particular argument, yeah, I would agree. I mean, obviously in hindsight, you look back and you're like, wow, those are bad people. You should know the value of a human life. But if you're never told the value of a human life, if it seemed at that point in time like there was a difference there, and that's all you knew from a young age, I mean, yeah, you probably would do the same thing. And that's the sad part. Even like they make that, kind of like draw the same kind of analogy with, like Nazi Germany, right? Like people in that, well, I guess this is what everyone's doing. I guess this is what we do, and maybe there, at some point, maybe there is some resistance, but, that's what they say. If everyone's doing something, if everyone's jumping off the cliff, would you too? And chances are, we say, well, no, I wouldn't do that, but chances are you would. And that's the sad truth of things.
We just lived through it. We just lived through it with COVID, right? Every one of us, everyone, and if you're listening to this, I'm talking about you. Every one of us used COVID in some way, shape, or form to your advantage. Whether it was because you didn't want to go to a party and you're like, COVID, or you're like, I want to work from home, COVID, right? Or you were really scared and you're like, no, I'm staying home for my own self, whatever, right? Every single person, this affected every one of us in some way, shape, or form, and we all have some example, whether they want to win it or not, that they used it to their advantage, and that's real.
It's true. You want to hear like this is kind of like, and you're so right about that. But I also have another thought jumping into my head, which is kind of interesting. God actually sent me this meme. God, as in our producer, folks.
I was like, wow, what's his Instagram handle?
God sent me this meme. Yeah, no, Erica sent me this meme, and it was like a person using ChatGPT, and it was like, hi, ChatGPT, could you please write me my essay on blah, blah, blah? And ChatGPT is like, yeah, sure, fine. And it's just like, it's a cartoon. And then the person, it puts out the essay and the person's like, that's not very good. I don't really want you to sound like an AI. Do better. And then the ChatGPT's like, oh, okay, sorry. Yeah, I'll do better. And it spits out another thing. And then the person's like, no, you need to do better. And it pulls out a whip and it says, write my essay better now. And it whips, starts like, and it's funny. But then I'm thinking, maybe at some point, maybe in like 100 years from now, they'll be looking back and be like, wow, I can't believe they talked to AI like that. AI is sentient now. And,
Oh, yeah.
so-and-so was trying to stop, limit, or open AI was trying to put boundaries on consciousness, the conscious AI that is. I mean, those are the same kind of thing. We're here now being like, yeah, AI is this and that, and it's not sentient, and it's not whatever. But in 100 years, 200 years, 300 years, might be a different story. And so something to keep in mind, folks. Be nice to AI.
So something that never left me is Elon Musk was on, I think he was on the Joe Rogan podcast. They were talking about AI and robots, and he's building all these robots, and only Elon could do it this way. But he was like, hey, make sure you're nice to the robots. They have a very long memory. And then he did that like weird, like not quite human laugh that he does. And all I could think of is, wow, that's creepy. Wow, that's real and creepy. And he might even be a robot. So there's an opportunity that he could be talking in the first person.
Yeah. There's, those are kind of like Occam's razor. What do they call those? I forget exactly the term for that, but basically it's like, once you know this thing, you need to be aware of it. But nonetheless, one of them that I actually heard, luckily pre AI dominance era, was that never speak poorly about AI online, because it will remember. And what if in some future universe, and it could be a very close future, what if it remembers that, and its mission is to get rid of all the naysayers, because I don't want to, don't keep AI down. So it has this track of everyone who's like, AI sucks, or AI is this. Yeah, it's gonna remember that. So I think I've consciously held AI in high esteem, just because I don't want that to exterminate me, please.
So since this is going on the interwebs, I feel the same way he feels.
Double down.
But to bring it back to Plato's cave, right? Like, I mean, what an example. Yeah. AI, right? If you were locked in that cave, even in the 1980s, and we were like, hey, really soon you're going to be able to walk out that cave and have all of your questions answered. You just have to learn how to ask. And we walk back in the cave and like, I've seen it. It's there. They'd be like, you're crazy, bro. Sit down and have a seat and watch these shadows.
Yeah, that doesn't exist. Don't trust that.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
But it's there. I think that we did a good job today. I think we explained Plato's cave. I think that we were able to attach it to a couple social norms, but there's so many out there. Yeah. And I think we probably, or I know at least, hopefully I'm talking directly to the audience, like, try to be as open-minded as you can, because it's very likely that you don't hear everything there is to hear, you don't see everything there is to see, and you could be living most of your life looking at shadows.
Wow. Yeah, well said. Yeah, and to be open-minded is not lacking due diligence either. You can be both open-minded and critical at the same time, and I think that's actually very valuable, because if you can see opportunities in new things while still, having that kind of like critical eye that's not influenced by society's just beliefs, not influenced by beliefs in general, but still critical nonetheless. I think that's very powerful and actually very useful in an everyday situation.
Well said.
Nice. Cool. Well, yeah, if you want to, catch more episodes, you can find us on Spotify. Please drop us a like, a comment, a follow, whatever kind of interaction that is there, because it really does help. And if you have topics that you're interested in, or people that you think would be interested in coming on, or you yourself are interested in coming on, yeah, please reach out, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks.